Okay, all you enthusiastic folks, come on back. We're at agenda item I, our last agenda for the day, which is an action item. Everybody feel all right? Good, good. Okay, this is our rulemaking, approving the climate-related evaluation criteria, and Jesse and Eric are going to present for us.
Thank you, Vice Jane. For the record, Eric Carson, Senior Policy Coordinator. I'm here with Jesse Kirshner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator, and we will be presenting on the climate rules for, hopefully for adoption here in a little bit.
Thanks, Eric. So for the record, Jesse Kirshner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator. So just wanted to start off with where we've been. So in January of 2022, the board passed the climate resolution. So for those of you that are newer to the board, there was a whole host of work that occurred prior to that date. I think kicking off in 2020, there was a climate committee then called that spent a lot of time doing some research and gathering background information, and all of that went into creating this climate resolution, which was passed in January. So the climate resolution, which you all have seen many times now, states that OWA will integrate climate mitigation and adaptation in our budgeting, investing, and policy making decisions by funding climate smart adaptation and resilience, funding projects that include meaningful emissions reductions, carbon sequestration, and protection of carbon storage, and making sure to value project co-benefits and assess long-term sustainability of our projects and acquisitions. It also states that we will learn and apply DEI and environmental justice principles when making our funding decisions, and we will engage traditionally underrepresented and impacted communities in our processes. So once that climate resolution was passed in January of 2022, we went through a public engagement process from March through June. Next. So that process, again, for some of you that weren't here during that time, there was a number of different opportunities for engagement. So we held 6 virtual listening sessions in April and May of 2022. We had a virtual tribal listening session. We also had an online survey that was open for a couple of months. We received 77 responses. We had one-on-one conversations with some of our different partners that wanted to have those. And then we were working with a consultant who conducted interviews with some of our non-traditional partners. And so this public outreach and engagement process was really asking our grant applicants and folks that we engage with, what are the challenges and opportunities that you see with this resolution? What are you concerned about as we move forward with implementing it? So last summer, in July of 2022, the board authorized rulemaking.
Okay, and after the board authorized rulemaking in July, OWA staff began developing some draft rule language, the evaluation criteria, and the definitions. At the same time, we were recruiting a rulemaking advisory committee, or a RAC, which was put together, then met 4 times over this past winter and spring. Each meeting was live streamed on YouTube, and we had public comments received, or opportunities for public comment at each of those RAC meetings, both verbal and written. So this is just a slide showing the membership of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. So it was developed to include people that were most likely to be affected by the administrative rules or the evaluation criteria, and includes a mix of grant applicants, grantees, grant reviewers, and others that would be impacted by the rules. Okay, so moving along on the timeline now. After the RAC helped craft a pretty close to final set of draft evaluation criteria and definitions, we moved to the more formal public comment period. So Before we opened it up for formal comment, we did ask our DOJ counsel to review the draft evaluation criteria and rules to make sure that they were A-OK from a legal perspective, and it turns out that they were, which was good. And then in late April, we did release the draft rules for public comment. We had a virtual public hearing in late May. We did not receive any verbal comments at that time. We did receive 2 written comments by the June 5th deadline, and a summary of those comments, as well as staff response and whether it resulted in a change to the rules, is provided in attachment B to the staff report. And if you're interested, the full written comments are provided in attachment C to the staff report. So on the timeline, that brings us to today, where we are seeking board approval of the climate rules. And here they are, at least the evaluation criteria. These are found in attachment D, so we'll have the evaluation criteria on this slide and the definitions on the next slide, which are also in attachment D. So the first criteria is how engagement with local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change has informed or will inform the project. The second criterion is how changing climate conditions are incorporated into the project and how the project will contribute to durable adaptation and resilience for ecosystems, including human communities. And the third criterion is how consideration of greenhouse gas emissions or long-term carbon sequestration or storage has informed the project. So definitions, we have definitions for carbon sequestration and carbon storage, durable adaptation and resilience for ecosystems, and local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. And after we're done with this presentation, we're going to pull up the attachment D, which has all of this for board discussion and questions, and if you all have any edits. And with that, pass it back over to you, Jesse.
Okay, thanks, Derek. So, assuming the board approves the climate rules, what comes next? Where are we going to go from here? So, if these rules get approved, the open solicitation grant offering opens up in August, and the new climate criteria will be added to those applications. So they will show up in the restoration, technical assistance, stakeholder engagement applications that will be open from August through October 31st. And then just a couple of examples of how these criteria have been added in so far. So this is an application question. 2 of them for restoration, where in design we incorporated the criteria into an existing question, where as part of the design alternatives we asked them to describe how consideration of greenhouse gas emissions or long-term carbon sequestration or storage has informed or will inform the design alternatives and selection of the preferred alternative. The second question is in the public awareness section, and we had to create an entirely new question because we didn't have one in there already that this fit in well with, but it was the criteria around engagement with local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. Next. And then in stakeholder engagement, again, this is an existing application question around the goals and objectives, and you can see this is an example of how we've integrated the criteria around adaptation and resilience, so how the project outcomes for the future restoration or acquisition activities, how they consider changing climate conditions and provide adaptation and resilience benefits. So these are just a couple of examples. The criteria have been incorporated into the applications wherever they fit best, but this is the plan going forward, is to see these in these applications. So the open solicitation applications will be submitted and reviewed in fall of 2023 and through winter of 2024. So just as part of that, I wanted to give a little bit of what our anticipated resources and trainings are likely to be for grant applicants and also for our review team members. So as part of this window of applications being open, we are going to be providing updated climate-related technical resources that are tailored to the application questions. I'm also working on creating region-specific climate information and impacts where that information exists. So each region will have its own climate summary. We'll also be providing in-person training opportunities around the state. So we're going to be embarking on a roadshow in late September and early October to each of the different regions to do in-person trainings on how applicants respond to these criteria. Also planning to have a virtual training for those folks that can't be there in person, which will be obviously recorded and available for them to watch. And then lastly, planning to have like an office hours sort of standing availability in which they can contact me during that grant writing time frame for questions and help with responding to the questions and criteria. And then we're working with the regional program representatives to figure out what's going to be the best avenue to train the technical review team members. So we will be having either some separate trainings and engagement that we'll be doing with them to make sure they understand what we're looking for in applicant responses and how they evaluate them and the resources that they also have to rely on as part of that. Next. And then, assuming all of that goes well, in winter, everything will be reviewed and submitted, and then in April of 2024, the open solicitation applications that are recommended for funding will come before the board, and you will get to see the responses to the climate criteria. So that will be the first time that those responses come before you, and we'll provide a summary of what that looks like. So that's where we're going. And that's all we have for our presentation. So Eric is going to pull up the attachment, which has the climate evaluation criteria and definitions. But if you have any questions before he does that.
Stephen.
Yeah. Criteria number 2. Eric, maybe it's too late in the day. In the beginning, did you show those 3 criteria as well in one of your first slides?
I'll pull back up the.
Maybe it's slide number 2.
Slide number 2.
That's what I'm thinking. The other way. Right. Okay, maybe those. My question is, with criteria number 2, you gave originally had draft criteria, and then you had public comment and changed the criteria based on public comment. Is that true?
Thanks, Stephen. The only change that we made in response to public comment was in the definitions.
Okay.
There was in the local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. We had a slight change based on public comment.
Okay. When I read number 2, it's the second part of number 2, how the project will contribute to durable adaptation and resilience for ecosystems, including human climates or communities. That seems gigantic. Can you give one example of what that would do? It seems like it went beyond climate and is talking about durable adaptation and resilience for ecosystems. Is that to climate change, or is it in general?
Hopefully the definition provides some clarity for the durable adaptation and resilience for ecosystems.
Okay. Yeah. Then you better remind them to read the definitions. Definitions of phrases.
Any other comments, questions? Bruce?
I just want to thank Jesse and Eric for doing this and give particular thanks to the RAC members. I watched those meetings They were passionate about the problem of climate change and how it was affecting Oregon, and they were thoughtful about what could be done and how OWEB fit in it, and they clearly had read the resolution, the board's desire, and I think did their best to fulfill that. So kudos to them, and please extend to them if the full board approves our thanks, because it was a lot of work. I did like the suggestions that were made by the slight tweaks made by the OECD. But that said, they were slight, and if we don't make any changes in it, I'm really happy with where we've gotten. So thank you.
Jamie.
I also want to start with tremendous thanks. You've worked so hard on this, thanks to our amazing team. And then also this really we were talking about some of the federal funding we were getting, especially Jesse, for your continued position with OWEB. It really shows how that investment in small funding will have a tremendous impact. And so thank you, Eric, thank you for all the work you did, the advisory committee, the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, who put such care into this. I also want to thank my colleague, Bruce Buckmaster, who really championed it. And I also want to say a name that is a former colleague of ours, Brenda McComb, who's at the OSU College of Forestry, who was a passionate champion for moving forward this, although OWEB's been around for years, for decades, the first ever resolution. And there's no topic more important and overarching. And so just really proud of that work and really appreciate current and former board members who support this moving forward. A key part of the resolution, and we are very mindful of this, is incorporating the DEI considerations into our work. And so I really appreciate that's been part of the conversation in the drafts. And that's included, of course, in definition number 11 and in criteria 1. One thing that struck me when I read it, and I wanted to be very kind of hands-off to see what the community came up with before commenting, and I think it's right there, but there's something that I think bears emphasizing in terms of community engagement. So one of the general concerns I've heard about DEI work is that it's more about things than with communities, and I think we could strengthen this point if we added and input from. So it currently reads how engagement with local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change has informed or will inform the project. If we were to add how engagement with and input from local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change is informed and will inform the project, I don't think it substantially it doesn't add any burden to it, but it emphasizes this point to our partners that it goes beyond simply informing to really making best efforts. If we don't get input, we don't get input, but really emphasize best efforts to go beyond informing to actively seeking input from. And so I wanted to get staff's comment on this. If you see any issues with adding this tweak, and if none, then I'd also like to encourage us to consider in making that small tweak as we move forward.
I'm going to let Eric respond after we figure out our technical difficulties.
If I can just respond to that, stakeholder engagement by definition, the term engagement includes communication and collaboration and listening. And maybe a way to get what you're driving at is just add a definition of engagement.
I appreciate that. I think the emphasis and the key point I'm trying to make is I can engage and chat with you about a topic if I think it's going to impact you, but if I've really set the standard of not just engaging with you, but also actively receiving your input as part of the process, I think it emphasizes the importance of what's an extension of our DEI work.
Yeah, I absolutely understand what you're saying, and I'm just arguing that that term includes that. The term stakeholder engagement is an essential part of extension. It's even called engagement, and they went away from extension and outreach and everything else to engagement to really reflect that dual component of interaction. So, but either way.
Gary? Gary, are you there? And unmute.
Unmute. How's that? Are you hearing me?
Good,
Okay.
yes.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Gary Marsh for the record. I just wanted to add to Jamie and Bruce's thank you, and we recognize all the hard work. You know, this is something that we have looked at and talked about, and it's been part of the, I guess, the thought and the vision of OWEB for some years now. And and we're getting to that. We're, and the hard work goes into developing all the details of it. Very important. But what's important to me is that it's the, it's the big picture. It's the fact we're headed for towards this goal of making sure that these projects are, carefully scrutinized, and that this is an important part of each project. That we would make this money, this investments, to do even better things than we have in the past. So I'm just really pleased with where we're at right now.
Thank you, Gary. Anyone else? Bruce?
I envision the rules. I would like to see the rules, and I believe they are, as broad as possible to encompass how we set the standards of our grant-making application, to give us, so why I understand what Jamie was saying and don't have any problem with it. Where this appears to me to be broad enough that when we start putting together and developing and refining over time our application process to emphasize climate smart activity, that we're not constricted by our rules. And I don't believe that I believe that this is broad enough that we can put together our applications and change and adapt our application as we learn more going forward without having to go back to the rulemaking. So I would have no problem making the change Jamie said, but I like the broadness of what you've come up with.
Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly Coates for the record. I just want to point out how few public comments we got on this, and I think that really speaks to what staff did. All of the listening sessions, the RAC, everything. I remember last year at our meetings, a lot of our grantees had major concerns about what this criteria was going to look like and how it was going to impact their ability to receive funding and get projects done. And I don't see any of that here. I didn't see any of that in the public comments, the written comments, nothing. And I want to thank you guys so much. I think you were really hearing the watershed councils and our practitioners with that, and that is truly reflected in here. So thank you very much.
Anyone else? Well, I'm going to throw out a thought because I can, and it isn't asking for change. But in number 2, when we say including human communities, I hope someday we don't have to say that. I hope someday we see we don't have a separation there, that we're part of the ecosystem, that we're supporting life, and it's all of it. I know it has to be there. I'm not asking you to take it out now, but I hope I'm still around when we do. So I don't see any questions or comments. Yes, please.
Yeah, for the record, Eric Harstein. So, James, just to refresh my memory, so you're looking at criterion number 1 and adding. So it would say how engagement with local communities and input from those local communities. So how engagement and input from local communities.
Engagement with and input from local communities.
So I think this was a big part of the RAC discussions, honestly, that it wasn't intended to be a one-way street when it came to communication, that it was the applicant reaching out to communities and having those discussions and receiving that input. So I don't see any issue with including that phrase in there.
Okay. Yes, Jamie?
Yeah, the chair would entertain a motion.
I would be very excited to make this motion. I move the board approve the climate-related evaluation criteria administrative rules found in attachment D to the staff report with a minor modification of including, quote, and input from, unquote, into criteria 1, such that it reads how engagement with and input from local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change has informed or will inform the project.
I second.
Okay, the motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further decision? Okay, all those in favor? Jamie, you want to just yippee it? All those in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed? Awesome. Motion passes. Good work. Good work.
Thank you.
All right, we're adjourned.